People keep asking the same question. At the grocery store, at the gas pump, when rent goes up again, when will prices go back down? When does it get better? When does this end? Because we're taught to believe inflation is temporary, a spike, a phase, a storm that passes. We're told prices rise, then they fall back to normal. That this is how the economy works. That patience is the answer. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one says clearly. Prices almost never go back down. Not in any meaningful way, not for the things you actually need to live. And that's not an accident. It's not a mistake. And it's not because the market hasn't healed yet. It's because the system is built so that once prices rise, they stay there. Think about it. When was the last time you saw rent drop back to what it was 5 years ago? Or groceries return to old prices? Or healthcare suddenly become cheaper? Or childcare, tuition, insurance, utilities, transportation, any of it? It doesn't happen. And when it does happen on paper, it's usually cosmetic. A sale, a temporary discount, a smaller package for the same price, a cheaper version with less inside. The number might look similar, the value never is. The first thing to understand is that inflation isn't just prices going up. Inflation is a permanent reset of the price floor. Once businesses discover that people can survive paying more, there is no incentive, none, to charge less again. From a business perspective, lowering prices is risky. Keeping them high is safe. Investors don't reward companies for being cheaper. They reward them for being predictable and profitable. And once customers adapt, once they reorganize their lives around higher prices, the market locks in that new reality. This is why inflation feels like a one-way street. Because structurally, it is. There's a common myth that inflation is driven by greedy companies suddenly deciding to raise prices. Greed plays a role, yes, but that explanation is too simple. The deeper reason prices don't come back down is that modern economies are built around debt, growth targets, and wage suppression. When prices rise, wages rarely rise at the same speed. That gap forces people to work more, borrow more, and accept worse conditions just to maintain the same standard of living. And once that gap exists, reversing prices would destabilize the entire system. Lower prices mean lower revenues. Lower revenues mean layoffs. Layoffs mean defaults. Defaults threaten banks. Banks threaten governments. Governments panic. So instead of fixing prices, the system trains you to absorb them. That's why inflation is always framed as something you need to adjust to. Budget better, cut back, downsize, be flexible, be patient, be grateful, be responsible. Notice who is never asked to adjust downward. Corporations don't tighten their belts. Shareholders don't accept lower returns. Executives don't take pay cuts proportional to inflation. Debt doesn't shrink. Rent doesn't forgive itself. Only you do. Another reason prices never fall is psychological anchoring. Once you've seen a price at a higher level, that number becomes the new reference point. A $7 coffee sounds insane until it's normal. A $2,000 apartment sounds impossible until everything around it costs the same. After that, even a small reduction feels like a deal, even if the price is still historically high. The system doesn't need prices to fall back. It just needs you to stop remembering what things used to cost. And over time, you do. There's also the issue of cost structures. When prices rise, companies restructure their entire operations around higher margins. New contracts, new salaries, new supply chains, new debt obligations. Rolling prices back would require unwinding all of that. That doesn't happen unless there's a collapse. And when collapse does happen, the relief doesn't go to consumers. It goes to institutions. Look at history. After major inflationary periods, prices don't normalize. Instead, wages stagnate and people adapt downward. Smaller homes, fewer kids, more roommates, longer commutes, less security, more side hustles. The system doesn't fix the problem. It normalizes it. And here's the most important part most people miss. Inflation benefits debtors at the top and punishes workers at the bottom. Governments with massive debt benefit when the value of money erodes. Corporations with pricing power benefit when costs can be passed down. Asset owners benefit because their holdings inflate. workers don't. So when people ask, why don't prices ever go back down? The real answer is uncomfortable. Because the people who control the system don't need them to. And the people who suffer from it don't have the leverage to force it. This isn't about conspiracies, it's about incentives. Systems don't do what's fair, they do what's stable for those in control. And high prices, once absorbed, are incredibly stable. One of the biggest illusions people still believe is that recessions bring prices back down. We're taught that when the economy slows, when demand drops, prices should fall. That's Econ 101. That's the textbook logic. And it used to be closer to reality decades ago. But the modern economy doesn't work like that anymore. In today's system, recessions don't lower prices. They shift who pays them. When demand drops, companies don't respond by cutting prices. They respond by cutting workers. Hours get reduced. Benefits disappear. Full-time roles become contract jobs. Stable income turns into unpredictable income. The price of goods stays high, but your ability to pay quietly collapses. That's the trick. Instead of prices adjusting downward, your life adjusts downward. This is why recessions feel so brutal now. You don't get relief, you get pressure. Everything still costs more than it used to, but now you're earning less, working more jobs, and living with constant uncertainty. And then there's the myth of deflation. People hear the word and assume it's good. Cheaper prices, relief, breathing room. But deflation is treated as a disease by policymakers. Central banks fear it more than inflation. Why? Because deflation threatens debt. When prices fall, the real value of debt rises. Mortgages become heavier. Corporate loans become harder to service. Government debt becomes more dangerous. Entire financial structures start cracking. So whenever deflation even hints at appearing, the system reacts aggressively. Interest rates get adjusted, liquidity gets injected, stimulus gets deployed, anything to keep prices from falling too far. Not for you, for stability at the top. This is why inflation is allowed to linger, but deflation is attacked immediately. One erodes purchasing power slowly, the other threatens the foundation of the system. Another uncomfortable reality is how inflation is measured. Official inflation numbers rarely reflect lived experience. They're averages, blended baskets, statistical smoothing, substitutions. If steak gets expensive, the index assumes you'll eat chicken. If rent skyrockets, it gets averaged with regions you don't live in. If healthcare explodes, it's weighted down by categories you rarely use. So when you feel like prices are crushing you but the reports say inflation is cooling, you're not crazy. You're just not the metric that matters. Your personal inflation rate is almost always higher than the official one, especially if you're not wealthy, especially if most of your income goes to necessities. And here's where the system gets especially cruel. Once prices rise, they reshape behavior. You stop asking for more. You stop expecting relief. You internalize the pressure as a personal failure. You think you didn't budget well enough, didn't plan far enough ahead, didn't choose the right career, didn't hustle hard enough. But what's actually happening is structural. Prices rise faster than wages by design, and then the narrative shifts responsibility onto you. This keeps the system quiet. If people believed prices would never come back down, there would be outrage. There would be demands for wage indexing, price controls, housing reform, debt relief. So instead, the story stays vague. It's temporary. We're almost there. Inflation is easing. Things are stabilizing. But stabilization doesn't mean reversal. It means the bleeding slows. It doesn't mean the wound heals. Think about how quickly people adapt to pain. At first, price hikes are shocking, then they're frustrating, then they're exhausting. Eventually, they're just background noise. And once that happens, the system wins, because nothing has to change anymore. This is also why every return to normal promise quietly disappears. There is no political incentive to say, prices are high and they will stay high. That truth doesn't get votes. It doesn't calm markets. It doesn't keep consumption going. Hope does, so hope is sold instead. And while people wait for prices to fall back, they take on more debt. Credit cards fill the gap. Buy now, pay later becomes normal. Long-term loans replace short-term purchases. Survival stretches across months instead of weeks. This locks people in. Once you're trapped in debt, high prices don't just hurt. You can't afford for them to fall. Your entire financial structure is now dependent on steady income and stable prices. A drop could destabilize you just as much as it would destabilize the system. That's how deep the trap goes. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. Even if prices did fall slightly, it wouldn't feel like relief, because the damage is cumulative. You've already paid more. You've already sacrificed. You've already adjusted your life downward. You don't get that time back. So when people ask, why do prices never go back down? The real answer is layered. Because lowering prices threatens debt. Because corporations don't benefit from it. Because governments can't afford it. Because the system has already trained you to live without relief. And because once a population adapts to pressure, the pressure becomes permanent. The final piece of this puzzle is the one almost nobody talks about honestly. Inflation doesn't hit everything equally. It never has. Prices don't rise in a vacuum. They rise along power lines. Assets rise first. Wages rise last. Sometimes never. When inflation enters the system, it doesn't spread evenly. It flows toward things that already generate wealth. Stocks, real estate, businesses, intellectual property, anything that can be owned, leveraged, or rented out. Those prices rise fast, often before inflation is even officially acknowledged. Wages, on the other hand, lag behind by years, if they move at all. This creates a widening gap that never closes. People who own assets feel inflation as growth. People who rely on wages feel it as punishment. That's why you can have headlines celebrating a strong economy, while most people feel poorer every month. The system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's just not designed around you. Once prices rise, businesses quickly discover something uncomfortable but profitable. People adjust. They complain, they struggle, they cut back, but they keep buying. They may switch brands, they may downgrade quality, but they don't stop consuming altogether. So prices stick. And when costs do fall behind the scenes, shipping, materials, energy, those savings are rarely passed on. They're absorbed, turned into margin, turned into shareholder value, turned into executive bonuses. Price increases are public. Price decreases are private. This is why the phrase sticky prices exists. Prices go up like rockets and come down like feathers, if they come down at all. There's no incentive to lower them once people have proven they can survive without relief. At the same time, inflation quietly rewires your psychology. You stop thinking long-term. Saving feels pointless. Planning feels fragile. Every decision becomes defensive. What can I afford right now? What can I delay? What can I ignore? That mental shift is powerful. A population stuck in short-term survival mode doesn't organize. It doesn't demand structural change. It doesn't challenge systems. It focuses on making it to the next paycheck, the next bill, the next crisis. That's not an accident. High prices combined with stagnant wages create exhaustion. Exhaustion creates compliance. And compliance keeps systems stable. This is also why inflation is often framed as a natural force, something abstract, weather-like, nobody's fault, just something we all have to endure together. But inflation isn't just an economic phenomenon. It's a policy outcome, a consequence of decisions about money creation, interest rates, asset protection, and whose pain matters most. When prices rise, someone benefits. Always. And when they don't come back down, it's because those benefits are now embedded into the structure. Reversing them would require redistribution, wage growth, debt relief, housing reform, all things that threaten entrenched power. So instead, the system normalizes the new reality and waits for you to adapt. And you do. You adapt by lowering expectations, by shrinking dreams, by redefining what doing okay means. Maybe owning a home becomes unrealistic. Maybe retirement becomes theoretical. Maybe stability becomes a luxury instead of a baseline. You're told this is maturity, realism, adulthood. It's not. It's adjustment to pressure. And here's the quiet truth most people never hear. Prices don't go back down because the economy you remember no longer exists. It was built on different assumptions, different demographics, different power balances, different debt levels. The current system can't afford reversal. It can only afford forward motion. That doesn't mean collapse is inevitable. It doesn't mean disaster is guaranteed. But it does mean waiting for prices to return to normal is a losing strategy. Normal has moved. The real question isn't when prices will go back down. It's how long people can be pushed to absorb the difference without breaking. And what happens when adaptation turns into anger. Because history shows this clearly. Systems don't fail when prices rise. They fail when people stop believing the pain is temporary. And that moment always arrives quietly first, long before it arrives loudly.